you share questions. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in the south suburbs of Chicago, and I currently reside in the Humboldt Park area of Chicago. I've been with AgeOptions in my role as Aging with Pride program specialist since April of last year. I've got a background in social work, my master's, and also I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Illinois. And I've got some past work experience in low-income, LGBT-friendly senior housing and acute inpatient rehab settings. But I'm happy to be back working with community at AgeOptions. This last year has been great, and thanks again for having us.
Thank you so much, Nina. Jason, tell us about yourself. And I think Jason may have frozen on us. Nina, are you able to message Jason?
Yes, yes. He may enter the room and sit side by side with me if we need to do that. It seems there's some
Okay, great. I forgot to introduce myself. So while Jason gets coordinated here again, my name is Cheryl Wayland. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm the Senior Director of Special Initiatives and Partnerships here at SAGE. And one of my primary roles here at SAGE is to lead the National Resource Center on LGBTQ plus aging. And, you know, one of the reasons why I wanted to have this program today is that we are receiving more and more requests from area agencies on aging, senior centers, SMP, SHIP, MIPA programs, ombudsman programs, you know, really just programs across the aging network who are interested in serving LGBTQ plus older adults. And many people want to either start a program specifically for LGBTQ plus elders, or they want to learn about how they can better include LGBTQ plus elders in our work. So before we get started with the presentation today, I do have a poll question, and I'd like to go ahead and launch our first poll question today. And everyone should be seeing the question on your screen now. The question is, are you currently serving older LGBTQ plus people in your programs? So we'll give everybody a few minutes to answer, and the options are yes, no, or unsure. We'll leave it open for just a few more minutes. People are still answering the question. Are you currently serving older LGBTQ plus people in your programs? We have about 85% of the participants who have answered so far. We'll be closing in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to share the results. So 73% of you all have shared that you are currently serving LGBTQ plus people. 4% said no, and 23% are unsure. Thank you all so much for sharing in that poll today. So, you know, for me, when I look at those results, one of the things that really stood out for me is when I started this work in 2008, and I would go into a room and do a presentation, I would ask the question, are you serving LGBTQ plus elders? And by and large, people didn't know, or they would flat out say, no, we aren't serving LGBTQ plus older adults. As we could see from those results, a majority of you who are gathered here today know you are serving LGBTQ plus older adults. And that really shows a change in our awareness of who we're serving, and also the increased comfort level of LGBTQ plus older adults to reach out to you for services. So with that, I would like to welcome Jason back to the stage with us and let Jason introduce himself, and then also your reflections about what we saw in that poll today.
Thank you, Cheryl. Hi, everyone. This is Jason Eccles at AgeOptions, literally at AgeOptions with Nina. And thanks for patience. Technology does what it does. And so my Zoom just went out. But I work here at AgeOptions as a manager of special initiatives. AgeOptions is the area agency on aging of suburban Cook County. So we serve all of Cook County except for the city of Chicago. They have their own area agency on aging. And a bit of my background is I do have a MSW from St. Louis, and I grew up in rural West I even just I messed it up. It's rural southwestern Virginia, the state of Virginia, but rural southwestern Virginia, and now here in the Chicago suburbs. But Cheryl, I do think that's such an interesting poll, and I think it goes back to some of the history of where we started. Is we knew we were serving older LGBT older adults, and we weren't sure where they were and or were they talking to us about it, did we know? But I remember some of your presentations from 2010 talking about the census and that there people are here, they're out there. And so it is really encouraging to see people say that they know they do or they're unsure. That is really an interesting development to see. And we were the same way of like, we know we're serving older adults who are LGBT. Are they telling us? Well, we don't know, but are we asking is probably the other question. So yeah.
Thank you, Jason. And before we get started, I have another poll that I would like to share. If I can do that, let's see. Okay, our second poll. Do you currently offer any programs specifically for LGBTQ plus communities? And again, we'll leave this open for a few seconds to give people an opportunity to respond. Few more seconds here. About 75% of folks have responded so far. And we will close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And here are our results. So 19% say yes, you are providing services and programs for LGBTQ plus elders. 72% no, and 9% plan to in the next year. This is wonderful. Thank you all so much for participating. So again, we wanted to have this webinar for those of you that are providing services. We hope that you'll use the chat throughout the session to share about the types of programs that you're offering, and also to learn from Thrive with Pride, the program at AgeOptions, about some of the work that they're doing. So to get us started with our first question from our panelists today, let's start at the beginning. Why did AgeOptions decide it was important to offer Thrive with Pride?
Thanks, Cheryl. So it actually has been brewing for us for probably a decade before we did it. And it was probably from a lot of pushing from Sage of like, no, you are serving older adults who identify as LGBT. So we knew that for such a long time that we wanted to have something that, we needed something to ensure people felt safe and comfortable. And our mission as an area agency on aging is to serve every person. And where you can get kind of twisted on that is like, but we serve everybody. We have something for everybody. But if they're not accessing in the same way, if they're not reaching out to, if they don't feel safe coming to your thing that you're offering, then you're not actually serving everybody. So sometimes specifically targeting people who have reasons to be or who have been historically marginalized or have reasons to not feel comfortable coming forward is a way to serve everybody. We were very fortunate in 2019 to receive funding from the Community Memorial Foundation, a local foundation here in the suburban Cook County area. And we use that funding to create Thrive with Pride and Thrive with Pride cafes. Right before we had done that, we had what's called memory cafes, and probably a lot of folks on the line are familiar with memory cafes. The heart of memory cafes for people with dementia and their caregivers or other people with memory loss is to create a stigma-free environment to exist in and to come together and meet other caregivers, other people with dementia. And that's what we wanted to kind of do around LGBT older adults, have a stigma-free place to just be like, well, we'll talk about, we'll have some fun, we'll learn some things, but with all of it is without judgment, without anything, you're all welcome here. We are specific for LGBT older adults. From that, the content could be the same. I mean, if you're talking about Medicare, talk about Medicare, but the environment you're bringing it into and the ability to answer questions that are specific to LGBT older adults is what was different. So again, we were thankful for that original funding from Community Memorial Foundation. We did get that in 2019, and we're starting our in-person cafes in 2020, right when COVID hit. So for maybe 1.5 months, we had lovely in-person or getting used to those. And then there was COVID. So we've then pivoted to online. We got additional funding from the Chicago Community Trust, and we're able to continue on our program from there.
So yeah, I can tell you a little bit about what the current format of the program is. It's sort of two-pronged. So AgeOptions hosts our own monthly online event where we bring in expert presenters on topics of interest to our participants. And those range, like Jason said, Medicare, things like community resiliency, storytelling, arts, things like how to be dementia friendly. So kind of bridging a wide variety of topics. So we do some quick introductions. We have the presentation, which we record, and then we'll do a Q&A discussion at the end. So that's what's coming out of AgeOptions monthly. And then the cafes that Jason referenced. So we do have a handful of partners that are in our service area, that's suburban Cook County. And so we provide them the materials from our monthly events with some follow-up questions, icebreakers, just to help dive a little deeper into the content at these more local cafes. And those are offered in a variety of formats as we've emerged from COVID. Some are in person, some are hybrid, and some remain online just because the participants in that particular area find that to be easier and more accessible. But so beyond just having a presentation, then those cafes are where the majority of the socializing happens. And so as Jason said, one of our primary goals is to alleviate social isolation. So kind of education and socialization, trying to come at it from all angles. That's a little bit about what we currently do. But in addition to that, like I said, we record all of our presentations. So we maintain an online archive of all of those. So if people can't join us the day of, they can always see what we've talked about and engage in the content afterwards. And then we keep a resource log for both LGBT older adults and caregivers, as well as service providers working at the intersection of LGBT and aging on our website. That's thrivingwithpride.org.
Thank you so much, Nina and Jason. And we do have a question that's already come in through the question and answer section of the Zoom platform. So this first question is, are older LGBTQ plus community members underserved within the aging network?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
So yeah, there's some research that sort of backs that, due to a history of trauma and just like lived experiences that perhaps have made this population feel unwelcome in traditional aging services settings, or that they couldn't access them in the same way, or maybe that people felt they couldn't be their true whole selves in those spaces, sort of lends itself to creating special programming. I don't know if you
And yes, so the answer is yes. Like Nina's saying, there's definitely some studies that go for it, and how it plays out is, in different ways. Um, Not a broad brush, not all LGBT older adults, but statistically, more LGBT older adults do not have children or don't have um, families, blood relatives. There's the whole idea of families of choice and everything. So I think like there's maybe a bigger picture issue of like in our country in America, we the way we provide aging services oftentimes relies on family caregivers, children to support, to take it in. And so when you don't have that statistically, that's not available to you in those ways, I think that's another way you're underserved as well. So, and again, not all, and there are families of choice that do provide for different kind of caregiving things. But I think of several programs that serve older adults and caregivers where there is just kind of this idea of like, well, your children will take care of you, or however that goes. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Nina and Jason, for answering that first question. We have a couple of other questions that have come up as well, but we'll come back to those. And I want to ask you all our next question from the panel, which, if you could talk a little bit more about how many people you're currently serving and how you go about doing outreach to the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, great questions. So in the last year, we kind of do it year by year with funding and what we're able to do, but we've reached over 100 LGBT older adults in suburban Cook County that are sort of known to us through a collection of our online monthly programming, as well as what our cafe partners are offering. And this is a just over 25% increase of where we were before. So we're seeing growth in the program. And this does not include anyone who accesses that archive that I mentioned. So folks who aren't able to join us, but go and watch our YouTube videos, or someone who might just need a resource that goes to our website. Those are a little bit harder to track, but over 100 that are known to us. And then sort of adjacent to that, we do, by nature of our work and the topics, end up reaching professionals that are working, like I said, at the intersection of aging and LGBTQ identity. So to date, we've reached over 40 of those individuals this year. Such as kind of a point in time for this fiscal year, but some of those numbers are hard to know if they're not coming to our regular programming. I'm sorry, there was a second part to that question.
Oh, the second part, how do you go about outreach to LGBTQ plus communities?
Yeah, I would say we use some of the traditional channels. So we do have like a listserv, an email listserv. So that is one of our primary ways that folks can sign up on our website to receive our regular programming updates that way. Also social media, so through AgeOptions, Facebook, Instagram accounts, promoting things that way, and then word of mouth. Those three are kind of through our focus groups. What we learned from the folks that we currently serve are like the main ways. Nothing beats word of mouth, as we've learned that from experience, but yeah, so those are the channels we're currently using. I don't know if you want to add to that.
And I think it's fairly good to be asked, is that'd be one of our big challenges and things. But I do also think what Nina mentioned is so as we were saying, like COVID made us change to a digital kind of environment. And at the time, we even called it a COVID lining, where we would never have done online events, but we actually found that it was a nice way for people to get involved. Like you didn't have to, in Cook County, it's so hard to get from one side to the other, like drive and connect. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that in different ways. But you didn't have to do that. You could do it from the comfort of your own home. You could remember 15 minutes before and say, oh, I'm going to go jump on the Thrive with Pride Cafe. And so that actually did help us in some ways. But outreach is a hard thing to do. Oh, the other thing is sometimes people like to be anonymous. And so that's why Nina's, mentioning that we post videos online and it's fine. You watch it, you get the information, you could reach out to us from that and not have to disclose. I know about y'all through Thrive with Pride. We do allow some of those things obviously like happen from that. So
And I would add, leaning into like the strength we have at AgeOptions, we have a lot of other team members that do outreach in the community. So we always make sure that we send them with materials for our programming. So if they're at a health fair or a different community event, AgeOptions as a whole is represented, but they're also making sure our rack cards are there and visible for anyone at those fairs and outreach events. And then we also lean into our network of allies that we have. So some of those professionals working in this field at the intersection of aging and LGBT identity, they help us publicize these events on their various listservs, social media, just telling a friend, so it's hard to pinpoint one. We're trying to come at it from all angles, but as Jason said, it is something that we're always working to improve those channels to reach new people and grow the program.
Great. I oftentimes would get calls or emails, here to my office at Sage asking, should we go to a bar? Is that where we should be doing outreach for LGBTQ plus older adults? That's always a great place to do outreach, but I also encourage folks to think about all those places where you're just doing your day-to-day outreach, having materials that the LGBTQ plus community sees themselves represented in, whether it's a handout that you have on, LGBTQ plus elders or, celebrating Pride or some other, LGBTQ plus event, having those materials at a farmer's market, at, a health fair, at a religious community, all of those communities are places where you may find LGBTQ plus older adults. So I think those are really important things. And, somebody in the chat just says, suggest outreach at churches and synagogues. Yes. At medical providers. Yes. We are everywhere as LGBTQ plus people. So you never know where that opportunity is going to be that you can really connect with somebody. Another question that just came in through the Q&A, can either Sage or AgeOptions help us better share information about programs, activities, initiatives, barriers? Is there a Facebook page that's dedicated to LGBTQ plus older adults or an agency webpage? I appreciate that question. And I know locally, so I live in St. Louis, Missouri, and I know on Facebook, there are several very active Facebook pages, supporting LGBTQ plus people. So again, I think connecting at that local level and seeing, what's happening at the local level for outreach is really important. One of the other things that we're working on through the National Resource Center is creating this idea of LGBTQ plus friendly aging networks and helping the local communities, start to develop your information and referral hubs that can help connect LGBTQ plus elders with the aging network. So your area agencies on aging, your HIV and aging service providers, home care companies, all those programs and services that LGBTQ plus elders need. How do we start to develop that local network so that we can make good referrals? And when this program officially launches, LGBTQ plus aging networks will be able to promote themselves through the National Resource Center on LGBTQ plus aging. And another way is through our Sage Care training and credentialing program. We have a number of aging providers. Many of those are here in the room today who have taken part in our Sage Care training and credentialing program. When you complete your trainings and qualify for a credential, your program is listed on the Sage Care website as a program that has been trained and credentialed by the Sage Care program. We then use that website to help refer people to services that they need. So that's another way to really lift up, your work within the LGBTQ plus community.
Cheryl, if I might
Nina,
add.
yeah, go
I
ahead.
was a bit remiss earlier in our overview of the program, like touching on the different kinds of partners that we work with. So we do try to leverage traditional and non-traditional as well as affirming faith communities. So right now we do work with 2 LGBT plus programs, 2 affirming faith communities, and 2 traditional aging service providers that are spread out in our service area. And so, yeah, with the funding that we have currently, that's where we're at. But yeah, certainly getting creative with the types of partners we work with to bring the resources at a more local level.
Thank you for that, Nina. And another question that we have here in our Q&A today. This person shares that they're not with an area agency. However, they work with an organization that serves people living with HIV. Many of their clients are 60 plus, and they would love to connect them with local aging services and resources. But some organizations are worried about HIV stigma. Do you have advice how you're helping to connect people, or have you helped to connect people with HIV and aging services?
Well, I guess I apologize. I'm trying to listen to it. It was like, as an area agency on aging, like if you're in our area, reach out to us. We'd be like, yeah, great, come on in. But I think the question is like, so in my area, I'm worried about reaching out to the local aging network agencies. And I'd encourage to still reach out to us. Like, we'll share, and depending on where you're at, it can be intimidating. I apologize if I'm misreading this question, or misunderstanding it, but as a professional, I would absolutely reach out to your local area agency on aging. It could vary by what state you're in. Some states are clearly not safe places to um, or become, we're lucky in Illinois, I guess is what we'll say. We have a very supportive Department on Aging, et cetera. But the Administration for Community Living, which is the overall federal organization over Older Americans Act funding, and therefore area agencies on aging, recognizes this as a priority group of LGBT older adults. And so I would think that that's something to reach out to your local area agency on aging. And this is hard. And I guess where I'm coming from is, even if you were an older adult, this is the conversation you'd have to have. Is like, I'd encourage you to reach out and be open with your doctor, your provider, your social service. But there's a risk in taking that too, of disclosing my my LGBT status, or my HIV status. Um, there's certainly risk in that. But as a professional at an organization, absolutely reach out to your aging network. If you want to reach out to us and like we can help facilitate, we'd love to do that too. But I wouldn't step back from it. There is I would say, from the federal government that's funding us, there is this impetus that like this has to be priority groups. That is happening. And Cheryl, I know you could speak more to that. But if you reached out to us, it is something that the other thing I would say is like, in our agency, we are aware of just the fact that older adults contract HIV, and people who contracted HIV earlier are living longer. And it's a wonderful thing. Sometimes you might have to educate, your local aging service provider of like, no, this is what happens. And you're in a great position to do that. Most area agencies on aging or aging network agencies want to know who's in their community, how they can better serve. So you're a great advocate for saying that, no, these are people in your community, and this is the specific things they need. Here's how we think you could help. And again, if you are in our area, reach out to us. But if you're not, we'd be happy to talk more about that one-on-one. So
Yeah, so I'm seeing a couple of questions that are starting to come together. Specifically, how do we provide better outreach and services to people with disabilities, people aging with HIV, and Black, Indigenous, people of color communities? So, when we think about the LGBTQ plus community, we also need to be very intentional in thinking about the intersections of age, race, ability status, race and ethnicity, and sexual orientation and gender identity, just to name a few. But how do we really think about those intersections and make sure that we're meeting the specific needs of the individual? And then also connecting with some of these other organizations, such as our HIV and aging providers, our communities that are serving primarily Black, Indigenous, people of color, as well as agencies that are serving people living with disabilities. Do you all have any thoughts or ideas there about how we connect those intersections and really, start to build these collaborative relationships?
Yeah, I would say, specifically for the Thrive with Pride program, part of that is just making sure we're bringing in diverse perspectives to serve as speakers. So diverse in gender identity and racial identity, and the content that they have to share. So giving them a platform is important to raise awareness. Would be a place to start.
And yeah, no, thank you. And I think something we've tried to Thrive with Pride was realizing we had these monthly events and hosted online, and Nina's been working to diversify the speakers who come in for that and making intentional effort in that. So we've had intentionality around that. And honestly, I mean, if we're honest about it, it was looking back at the presenters and being like, well, there were a lot of white people. There were a lot of white, maybe cis men who were doing, and okay, that's what happened. So what can we do to be different about that? What can we do to be intentional around that? And I think too, like in larger aging service discussions, intersectionality is so huge and something that we struggle with. I think particularly when you said like people with disabilities, as area agencies on aging, we're supposed to work with, connect with, and build those relationships as well. And I don't know if we always do a great job of it. But it is like it is being intentional about it. And finally, having those partners in the community. In your community, there absolutely is there's some organizations that are serving the last question, people living with HIV. There are people, organizations serving people with disabilities. So connect with them, learn, be open and humble to what you're hearing. In particular for us, I think of one of our partners is a historically African American church. And they've been so patient and trying to speak to some of the topics they're doing, and like it makes sense. You're like, okay, but they're like, no, actually this means a lot to LGBT people of color, and like this is why. And so it's been helpful to have those partners and just listen to what they're saying. They're speaking from their congregation, from their people they're working with. But it's it's important perspective to take in and kind of listen to and make the connection of why that's important. And the final thing is, I think when you're working with partners in the community, I think it's very easy for us as an area agency on aging that funds local community organizations to work with senior centers, traditional aging services. It's not as easy when you're dealing with or working with somebody who's outside of that. Even working with organizations that serve people with disabilities, there's a long history of the disability rights movement and where the center of how they approach client work, the nothing for us without us, being extremely supportive of self-determination. And it's important to hear that and to be a little humble of like, well, this, and recognizing the history of why aging services do this and why other organizations do it a different way. And I don't know if that's too vague, but I've noticed that enough that you do have to listen to, and and when you break outside of it, it's so important. It's important to examine like the way that you're operating as an organization when you're working with other partners. So
Thank you for that, Jason. And I also wanted to uplift something I saw in the chat. We have a very active chat today. So thank you all so much for joining in the chat and also our Q&A. But one of the things was schedule a meet and greet. If you're trying to build relationship with people serving folks with HIV, call that organization up in your local community and say, we'd love to sit down and chat about how we can better serve folks aging with HIV. Because one of the data points that we know today is the largest segment of our population being newly diagnosed with HIV are folks over the age of 50. And we'll continue to see this. So how are we building those connections between our aging organizations and those serving people aging with HIV? So those are really important. That can also, work with, organizations serving people with disabilities. We know that sexual orientation and gender identity cross all sectors of our communities. And so it's important that we build these relationships. SAGE is hosting a webinar in July with the National ARC, who serves people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And part of that is building those relationships and starting to talk about the intersections of being LGBTQ+ and also a person with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Another great resource at the community level would be our independent living centers. We also have a person in the chat who said they would be a good resource for reaching out to folks with hearing loss. So, these are all communities that we can do a better job of reaching out to and supporting in our work. And oftentimes it's just one person reaching out and saying, let's sit down and chat. How can we better serve, all who are within our communities that need our services? I also want to take another question that came up in the Q&A. The lovely thing about this presentation today is that you all are providing so many good questions that we're not going to get to all of them, but we will make a commitment to answer these questions in writing, and they will be posted. We won't put the person's name who asked the question necessarily, but we will answer all of these questions, and they'll be on the National Resource Center website along with the recording from today's webinar. But the one question I wanted us to look at next is, this person shares that they're an ally and advocating in a very conservative part of the country, which can be stressful and scary. I know a few people who have gone back in the closet due to being bullied in our area. I worry that speaking up at times could cause job loss or exclusion. They just don't even know where or how to start the conversation. Although coworkers are generally inclusive, they're just concerned. They want to promote inclusion, but don't know how to start the conversation. So Nina and Jason, do you have any thoughts on how to start this conversation within an organization?
Great question.
And Nina, you're a little soft, so if you can scoot up closer to the mic. There we go. Thank you.
Hopefully that's a little better. I am pretty soft-spoken. So how to start the conversation around, can you repeat that?
Yeah, in a conservative area, how do you start this conversation in an organization? Do you have any tips or resources? And if folks have ideas in the chat, feel free to put those in the chat as well.
Yeah, my initial thought would be like if there's an individual that's bringing that to a trusted source at one of these agencies, or just like inviting open forum, like focus groups, so you can gather people with similar or shared identities to chat in a safer space, or perhaps if it's more anonymous, like surveying where people don't have to present themselves, might be a way to get some feedback.
And Yeah, it's a little hard for us to say because living in Chicagoland in a state that's not that, we're lucky, as I said. So for all of the people living in these very conservative areas where it's not safe, it's as an ally, thank you for what you're doing. And I think you do what you can do, and you got to decide what's the like safest, like where your power is. But some I if I if I were to imagine, there are probably coworkers who are queer or part of the LGBT plus community, or other allies. There's somewhere. So you could do possibly even just one of the trainings for LGBT competence. Sage Care offers some. I know that there's some things through ACL that are offered that you could just invite people to, and it's not, you could even identify as like, I'm an ally, or, just however you want to. So it's not like I'm coming to this and self-disclosing that I'm LGBT. As professionals, I think we have a little bit more safety in speaking out. But the hard part of what I hear you saying is like seeing people living their lives and not being able to do it openly without fear of retaliation, like having to take measures to be safe. And I also think like, safety is something that's personal and it's subjective. And so what people are doing in reaction to their environment is logical. So what you can do to make any cracks in that in an incredibly hostile environment, it is so important. So remembering that. And I know this might seem silly, but if you can go to a conference where there be other people who are allies or something like that, to where you can not feel alone in what you're doing, that's important too. So in essence, self-care, taking care of yourself. I'm sure there's other people in comments who are living in more conservative areas who might have better ideas, and but those are some thoughts I'd have up front. And thank you for all you're doing. It really does matter. So
Thank you, Jason. I also would like to recommend a toolkit that we developed, and I'm going to talk about it, and then I'm going to share it in the chat so that people will know where they can find it. But we developed a toolkit about 3 or 4 years ago now with PFLAG, which is the organization that supports families and friends, predominantly of LGBTQ plus youth. And it's really a place for allies. And the program or the toolkit that we developed is grandparents supporting their LGBTQ plus grandchildren. And, we have found that today, almost every older adult knows that they have an LGBTQ plus grandchild, an LGBTQ plus son or daughter, niece or nephew, or other relative. And so thinking about how we can support the older adult to better understand and to gain knowledge about LGBTQ plus people, it can oftentimes be a place to start this work. And so I would encourage people to take a look at the toolkit that's available through the National Resource Center website on grandparents coming out in support of their LGBTQ plus grandchildren. You can download this toolkit and use it to lead a group discussion. We've also seen area agencies on aging partner with their local PFLAG chapter, which there are PFLAG chapters across the country. And we've seen area agencies on aging lead programs at libraries or other community spaces. And, by starting to educate our older adults, when we become more supportive of our family members, then we also become more supportive of our coworkers and our LGBTQ plus neighbors and clients. And so that's oftentimes a place to start these conversations. And again, as people are thinking of questions throughout the day, part of my job with Sage is to help provide technical assistance. And so if you would like to continue these conversations in more of a one-on-one space, feel free to email me and we can definitely, set up some time to meet with you individually or as a group. if there's more than one person on your agency that would like to have this conversation. So thank you for that. We had another question that was shared in the chat. Let me see if I can get back to it. It was around asking about sexual orientation and gender identity in your intake forms and your needs assessments, and hoping that you would have more respondents. And so they were asking, if people have any advice for the future about getting a stronger showing on surveys that you're doing in needs assessments. So Nina and Jason, do you have any thoughts on how to increase the responses of LGBTQ plus people?
Yeah, I would first start by acknowledging that you all at Sage have put out some great resources around the how to ask sexual orientation and gender identity questions, which we have leaned into and kind of adopted for a lot of our programmatic intake questions. Of course, always having the option for people to prefer not to answer. So I would say it starts with just asking the questions, having those SOGI questions on your forms if you don't already. So yeah, that's what I would start with.
Yeah, and 100%, like we're not paid by Sage. But we legitimately love Sage's SOGI guide to asking SOGI questions. Absolutely pick that up. Start there because it's really empathetic to as an organization and provides different ways to think about it. So it's just a really fantastic resource. And I think I was seeing I don't see the chat fully, but I saw something about other AAAs doing area plans, trying to get feedback on. And oh my goodness, yeah, we struggle with that too. That is hard. That is really hard. So, on one hand, if you have an open survey and just open to everybody, you're likely not going to get a ton of people who are part of the LGBT community. If you're doing area plans, trying to get feedback and want to identify whatever the intersectionality is, you're asking those questions and you realize we don't have a lot of people with disabilities. Reach out to your Center for Independent Living. If so for us, we did do something similar, had a needs assessment and didn't have a lot of LGBT representation. We went back and did a focus group with one of our cafe partners. It wasn't huge, and by no means would I say that a handful of people who were there are representative of the entire LGBT population in suburban Cook County, but it gave something. And I think there is something important that the idea of statistics, having enough people to make something real well, that's one way of thinking. But when you're working with this, sometimes it is a focus group. Having those commentary, having that kind of input is just as valid in telling the story of what you're trying to do. Having the one comment from somebody who says, I didn't feel comfortable until I came here and saw this, that's valid, because they're representing hundreds of other people who aren't speaking out or able to put that into words. And so those kind of anecdotal stories, focus groups, those are important. And I'm afraid I don't have anything else to add to it other than it was hard for us. It was really hard. It still is really hard. And keep trying. Do reach out to local LGBT centers, different places where you could maybe get a small convening of people, and recognizing that maybe that's not statistically significant, but it's something. And that is important and it is valid in its own way.
Yeah, I would also share, to keep in mind that for many LGBTQ plus older adults, this may be the first time that they've ever been asked questions related to their sexual orientation and gender identity in a community survey. And so the first time that you see those questions being asked, they may be a bit concerned about answering the question. The important thing is that we're providing the opportunity for people that feel comfortable in answering the questions to share the information that they need to share. So, we're really excited that the questions are being asked, and we have training available through our Sage Care training program specifically on asking inclusive intake questions. So if that's something that your organization, wants to make sure your employees and volunteers are equipped to start asking those questions, whether it's through the intake process or just looking at your surveys and needs assessments, then please feel free to reach out about the availability of those trainings. And we are at 150. So I want to just, continue to open up the Q&A and also our chat to see if there are other questions that we can help you with today. And I see that somebody has asked for a link for our guide on sexual orientation and gender identity. And so I'm going to try to drop that in the chat, as well as the, and Jane Haskell just dropped that guide in there. Thank you, Jane. So Jane has dropped the link for the asking questions around sexual orientation and gender identity into our chat. And I'll also see if we can find the link for the grandparents coming out in support of their LGBTQ plus grandchildren. Jane, if you're listening, I believe that chat or that guide can be found under the Ally or Allyship tab on the National Resource Center website. Any other questions for Jason and Nina? We do have somebody that responded, or that Mealy responded. I think it's important to recognize a person's identity may not match the demographics listed on a survey or intake form. So offering, an other option, or, identity not listed, please describe. That can be very important. So we encourage you to, think about how you're asking questions on intake forms.
And to that, the Soji guide from Sage actually does that. And I don't know, Jane, if you want to share again with everyone, it's a fantastic thing, but it does do that. And a funny, kind of off the cuff, but one of the things with sexual orientation is I use a different term. So when we set it up on our site in an online survey, you click, I use different term, it opens up a open space where you can say what term you use. And I goofed and didn't make it so it only opened on that. It was opening for everybody. So when we got the survey results back, I was like, why are people telling us that they're straight? They were like putting in widowed, divorced. I was like, what is that? Oh, okay. I made a mistake. And so we've corrected it. So I use a different term now, just opens for people who only select that, which is a lot better. But using an open-ended for gender is great too. There is an issue on the backside of like, then, does the state or whatever database, does it allow for that? That's where advocacy comes in, and we're encouraging our partners, and we've been pushing anytime we go to the state of like, your database doesn't allow for more than just these few. What do we do with that? And trying to push for that. So thank you, Cheryl, for sharing that.
Yeah, and we have another question that maybe Nina and Jason can look at here. How do we overcome the digital divide when promoting events and information? And I think that's across the board. I feel so disconnected today because so many things you only see on Facebook. So if you're not following the right website, the right, organization or people in your community, then you miss things. So how do we overcome the digital divide?
Yeah, I certainly don't have like a one size fits all answer, but we some different things we've tried, in our local partner sites, having physical materials, so spaces that we already know our community is accessing, making sure there's something for them to take away that's not just a link or a Facebook post. In addition to that, sometimes partners get creative and take out like local ads in the newspaper. That might be like a very niche demographic, or you might not be able to tell how many people you're reaching going that route, but kind of for our outreach in general, like no stone left unturned in terms of trying creative ways to reach people.
And thing I'd add to that is in some ways embrace the digital divide, recognizing it leaves some people out, but it actually, particularly with LGBT community, I imagine it includes where people, a lot of LGBT people find community online and seek it out there, and that might be their only connection. So in some ways with this population embrace a little bit, we do that as well as recognizing we're going to not reach everybody, so it can't be just one thing you do. But there is a little bit of like finding the silver lining of the rainbow in, being more online and being more digital. But you do have to do more than one.
Cheryl, I don't want to jump the line, but I want to make sure we're able to touch on some advice. I don't know if you were going to
Yes,
ask.
please do that. Share
Sure.
your advice with us.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the great questions Cheryl had posed to us was what advice would we give other organizations starting to look at providing LGBTQ plus programming or improving what you already have. And so certainly around tech and outreach, those are all things we too struggle with and kind of lean into our partners and other resources we have. But we just had a couple of bullet points, I think, over the last few years. I know I've been here a little over a year, and Jason's been alongside the program since its beginning. So just kind of share some of those tidbits if they're helpful. So one was just like starting within, so training your own staff and volunteers to first ensure that those that are at the front of whatever programming you decide to provide are affirming of people who are walking in the door or joining you online. Starting small too. I think in our early conversation, Cheryl, we talked about not just jumping straight to drag bingo, starting small. Like it's just important that you start and have those conversations and don't feel like you have to go to the moon for your first attempt at something like this. And then not recreating the wheel. So in the development of Thrive with Pride, there were other programs such as the memory cafes that had a good existing model. So those stigma-free spaces or other programs that exist can be adapted. You don't have to start brand new to bring programming to your community. I don't know if you want to keep going.
Yeah, and so continuing from there, just being intentional, consistent, meaning like best to kind of do something continuous, not every day, every week, but maybe once a month, once a quarter, just something that's some consistency beyond just I did one thing and I'm done. Nope, all this is a journey. You kind of keep going with it. So being intentional, be consistent. Always be considerate of the safety and security of the spaces you create. Again, safety is a perception, and particularly with this community, particularly in some of the communities that you all are working in, you have to be really mindful of the safety and security and what that means for people. We've had to face that in a couple different ways to get creative. And finally, I think particularly at AgeOptions, sometimes it feels like we want to bring something into the world that's fully thought out from every angle and just have things be perfect and, wait till it's that. And with this, just remember, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So, if something is like there and you're like, for example, I wish that we did have more input from focus groups about what programming we should do, but I can't wait for that. I have to put something out there, which then gets more people to recognize they can come to you for feedback. And so just don't let the perfect be the enemy of good. And I think reaching out to others, so being in these office hours that Cheryl's putting on, like sharing ideas is a great way. Cheryl is a fantastic resource, and the team at Sage are great for the technical assistance. And we're honored to be guest here, but ours is one idea that it's working for us and may not work for you. But hopefully there's some ideas, and we're always willing to chat with people because we're just excited to see from Cheryl's poll, 20%, almost 20%, we're having things or more, we're thinking of starting things. That's fabulous news. It's so encouraging to see. So keep at it, keep doing what you're doing, and share out what you're doing too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason and Nina. One last question, and then I know we're getting close to time. But our last question, we mentioned social media as a way of doing outreach. Do we have any other resources or suggestions for creating a safe space in a very public context, especially in more conservative areas? I just posted another resource guide in the chat, and it is our guide on inclusive services for LGBTQ plus older adults, a practical guide to creating welcoming agencies. Being here in this webinar today is a start. The next step is to make sure that our agencies are really ready to lead in being LGBTQ plus inclusive and welcoming. And this doesn't have to mean starting an LGBTQ plus specific program, because in some communities, especially in an area that maybe doesn't have LGBTQ plus programming or is very conservative, folks may feel fearful to come into a space and potentially out themselves. So making sure that our agencies are inclusive, and that includes looking at our policies, our procedures, our intake forms, our non-discrimination policies. Are the non-discrimination policies inclusive of sexual orientation and gender identity? Those are all ways to be supportive of LGBTQ plus elders. Also making sure that you're providing staff and volunteers with training and providing education for constituents as well, so that grandparents coming out in support of LGBTQ plus grandchildren, that can be one way to show your support in a very public way that may also be in a conservative area. So those are all examples of how we can start this work. And, once we've done the work to make sure our organizations are ready, then you can start doing that outreach. When an organization becomes Sage Care trained and credentialed, you get a credentialed seal that has a rainbow sticker on it that you can place on your website, place on brochures, ways to help signify to the community that you are LGBTQ plus inclusive and welcoming. So these are all ways to start the work and to really help uplift, what we're doing. As you leave the webinar today, there is a survey at the end. We encourage you to complete the survey, and there's an option for you to list your name and email address if you would like to continue to be invited to spaces like this where we can really share, across the aging network and build up the resources with you in support of LGBTQ plus older adults. So as we close, I would just like to see if Nina and Jason, if you would like to share a few closing words with the audience today.
Sure. Yeah, we'll start by expressing gratitude. It's an honor to be invited as a guest to this space, and we're really excited to be a part of the conversations of what Sage is looking to create with the Friendly Aging Network. For Thrive with Pride, for AgeOptions, some things we're looking forward to doing is incorporating some of what we talked about today. So making sure we are asking SOGI questions across all of our programs, being more strategic with outreach so that we're hitting other areas in our service area that may not be being reached currently, and hoping to also provide some training to our funded agencies. So trying to serve as a leader to the other agencies we fund in creating affirming spaces for LGBT older adults. But yeah, thanks. That's it for me.
Thank you, Nina.
And I'll just add that, it was so encouraging. The first poll showed a lot of people are aware that in their communities, they're serving LGBT older adults. If you're not sure, you are. And they're there. They are part of the communities you're serving. And so just recognizing that, and then remembering and thinking of the person in the very conservative state, the ally, that what you do matters, and it is like a beacon to people. One thing we've often said about our program is, if nothing else, we're like a lighthouse just out there saying, like, no, this is a safe harbor. This is a place where we are intentionally trying. So a SAGE certification, whatever little thing you can do to move that needle, to kind of crack through a little bit, it does matter. Thank you all so much for the work you all do throughout our country. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason and Nina, and thank you all for attending today. It was so great to see so many people from across the country joining us for this conversation as we celebrate Pride in support of LGBTQ plus communities, and especially our LGBTQ plus communities who are aging across the intersections. And so we're just so excited for you all, and thank you for being here. Again, when you close out today, there will be a survey. Please take the survey and we will be in touch.